Hello, I'm Daniela Mellen, and in today's video, I'm going to show an interesting slow stitching technique to create a molded flower. Now there's no pattern, and all we use is fabric and thread. I'm using some fabric scraps in colors that I really like for this technique, and some embroidery floss in a matching color. And then I take some green embroidery floss to make the stem and the leaves. But this technique is totally variable, and you can use whatever stitches that you like, as well as the colors and fabrics that you like. So here's my process. So to come up with this little flower here that's very three-dimensional and has all this little texture, it's really quite simple, and I choose some fabric scraps. I'm going to sew it onto just this little background so that I can use it in future work. You could also sew this directly to your piece as you want to use it. I chose purple just because I thought that was a nice color for the flowers. And then I want to cut a circle, and as you can see here, it's far from perfect. You want a circular shape. I'm also going to cut some small ones because I want to make little buds. I'll just eyeball the shape, and I can always go back and refine it further. Cut another one here just to give me some options. And the trick to cutting this circular shape is just to go in and gently create a little tension so your scissor grips the fabric, and then gently twist the fabric. You don't want to ever fully close your scissors. Just partially close them, like little teeny bites. And there I have my shapes. I'll probably only use 2 or 3 of them. From here I want to just sketch briefly my flower. And this is ink that will disappear with the heat of an iron. So I'll just kind of create my flower shape here, my stems. And I can go back in and create more if I need to, but this just gives me a feel for where I want to put my work. Now to create the major flower up top here, I just take my circle, my fabric here, and I kind of fold it in half. Now from there, I fold it in half again, but I don't try and make it perfect. You can, and you can leave it just like that or fold it over again, but I like to have different layers. So I, again, take my fabric, fold it in half, so now I have a half circle, and then I'll fold it mostly in half again. There's a little overlap here, and then I can fold it up so I have this interesting shape. Now this might be a little big for this piece, so I'll go to my smaller piece of fabric and I'll do the same thing. Fold it in half, I fold it in half again, just shy of the actual circle, and then I fold it in half again. And you can play around with getting the different sizes and folds that you like. Now I like that the raw material is showing the wrong side. So I'm just going to hold it in place here. You can also use a pin. And then I have my thread. In a somewhat matching color. And I'm just going to go to the base, not to the very end, but maybe just a little bit, 1/4 of an inch or so up, and I'm going to put in a very tiny stitch. And this is just going to hold my fabric in place. So I have that little tiny stitch, and then I'm just going to gently open the fabric and put another stitch in here. Now I know that this stitch will be hidden, so I'm going to make this a little larger just to anchor it in place. And all I'm trying to do really is secure my folds. I'll fold that over again, make the tiniest stitch because it'll show. These are just tacking stitches, and I do just as few as I need to do. And then I take my last piece here and I fold it over once again, and I add just 1 more stitch. You can add as many as you'd like. You can go around the border if you like, but I just like to have just enough stitches to hold it in place. I think I'll maybe do 1 more up top here. So I come in, find where I want my needle to go, because I want this fabric to lay somewhat flat. And I create that stitch to hold it in place. On the back, I'll just knot it off, create a small stitch partially through the fabric, knot it off, and then trim it. Now I'll do the same thing with smaller buds over here. I'll take my little circle, fold it in half, and then in half again, and then on itself. And because it's such a small material, it can be a little challenge to work with. When I have that folded the way I want, I'll hold it in place and set it right down where I want it to go. And I want that point to follow the direction of that stem. Again, I'll come up through that piece with my needle and thread, knot on the back of that thread, and tack it down with a stitch. I can decide if I want another stitch. I think I'll have just one more stitch just to the side of my initial stitch, and I'll tack it down. Now this is coming up quite a bit, so I can either just go with it, but I think what I'm going to do is hold it down, tack that first fold down with a stitch. So I know it's nice and secure. I'm going to leave my thread attached and do my second little bud here. So again, I fold it in half, and then again put my folded piece of fabric down, and then come up with my needle and thread to tack it into place. Don't want to pull the thread too tight because I don't want to pull my fabric piece, and then I'll just tack it into place. Give it 2 tack stitches, and then on the back I'll knot it. I'll snip that thread, and as you can see, I have all my little tacking stitches, and my flowers are tacked down. So now I want to come in with some green thread for the stem to make a stem and some leaves. I'm going to start with the stem first. What I like to do is start at my largest flower, and I come up close to that first stitch that we made, so about 1/4 of an inch up. You can even go over that first stitch if you want to hide it. And I bring it right down to my stem. Now from here, I'm actually creating the little part of the flower, the greenery that holds the bud into place. So I'm going to come up a few more times, making stitches and bringing them all to that same point. I'll even come just slightly off my flower to do that. And then I'm going to come on the other side as well. I'll come slightly off my flower, and I fill in with as many stitches as I think each flower needs. So as you can see, that's a nice basis. Now from here, I just like to do a back stitch to create the stem. So I follow that line that I traced, and I create that stem. You can use any stitch that you like here, stem stitch or a split stitch, even a running stitch, any stitch that you appreciate. And I just follow that length of that stem. Now I'm not stitching perfectly on this line, but that's okay because I will remove it with my iron in the heat. I'm going to finish my back stitches over here, and then we'll come back and make some leaves. So now I stitched all the way down my stem. I stitched to my little blossoms here, my little buds, and I stitched right onto them as well. So now I can leave it just like this, or I can add a few little leaves. I like to take my marking pen and just make a few little areas where I want to put those leaves. And then maybe I'll have a few larger leaves here. So then I'll just go in there with my needle and thread and stitch those leaves. I'll start at the top here and just create little stitches that meet the stems, particularly on the ones with the little buds. And then on these larger stems, I think I'm going to do a couching stitch. So I'm going to create a line of stitches down the center of this area that I drew, again using the green, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just giving me direction. And then I'm going to come up from one side and stitch right over the other side of it, not through the stitches that I made, but just in covering them with my thread. And I want to get my stitches fairly close together so it fills in that area nicely. So I'm just going up and down on either side, filling in those leaves. There are many stitches you can use for this technique. This is just the one that I wanted to use today. Carefully finish all my stitches. And I want the top to be a little narrower than the rest of the stitches. If there's any areas here that I see there's a little bit of space, I'll go back in and fill them with just a little stitch here and there. Do one more over here. And one over here. I'll stitch this side of the leaf and then we'll come back and look at our work. So there's the completed stitching. I took my iron and removed any of the ink that remained for our guide. So that's one way to make an interesting flower. So this is the way I make this interesting fabric flower. It's three-dimensional, it has some texture, it's a little bit rustic, and I really like using this in my work. I hope you find it helpful and you can use it in your work as well.